We start Saturday with a lot of fine weather, best of the sunshine the southeast, as well as parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. This finger of cloud pushes into northern and western England as well as Wales to bring some light rain by the afternoon. But for many, this weekend is looking mostly settled, if a lot cooler compared with the weather of recent days.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you could win big this summer. First, there's a totally tax-free £15,000 in cash to make your summer spectacular. Spend that extra cash however you like. You'll also win a brand new iPhone, Apple AirPods, and if that wasn't enough, a £500 voucher to spend at your favourite UK attraction. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats, and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can also enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark Dolan and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but actually it's about you.
And we won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear
all sides
as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to the GB News winners at this year's Trick Awards.
And the winner of Interview of the Year is... Alistair Stewart reveals his heartbreaking diagnosis to Camilla Tormini.
And the winner is GB News Breakfast. And the winner is Nigel Farage.
And thank you to you, our GB News viewers and listeners, for making us the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. I'm Michael Portillo bringing you State of the Nation. Tonight, GB News Vote 2024, the leaders. The interview with Rishi Sunak has occurred and it covered topics from Gamblegate to the dire polling that suggests that he could lose his own seat to his views on Nigel Farage. He makes very clear that he doesn't want you, in his words, to surrender to Keir Starmer. As a leaked recording of a Labour frontbencher reveals the true cost of the green transition, has the penny dropped on net zero, and will politicians be honest about it? Nigel Farage addressed an audience in the northeast today, claiming that pandemic lockdowns were the UK's biggest peacetime mistake. He's also condemned the British government for paying money to France to suppress migration, whilst French vessels escort illegal sailings by migrant dinghies towards Britain. I'll also be speaking to a member of Tony Blair's cabinet about how this election compares and contrasts with the Blair fever of 1997. Lord Faulkner, the former Lord Chancellor, will impart his worldly wisdom. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my panel, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the journalist and Conservative peer Paul Goodman. But first, it's time for the News Bulletin with Polly Middlehurst.
Michael, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is that the Prime Minister is urging voters not to surrender to Labour, adding that this is a really important election moment where Britain could make a better choice. He was speaking to GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, and Rishi Sunak said if Labour wins the election, they'll reverse all the changes he's made.
I want people to surrender to Labour. I don't want them to surrender to their tax rises. I don't want people to surrender our borders to Labour, our welfare system to Labour, our national security to Labour. Right? I'm up for the fight. I want people to join me in that fight. Like, we should not surrender our country to this. Right? We can do better. Last year's has not been easy. I'm not saying we've got everything right. I completely understand that. But this is really important, this election. If Labour are in power, they'll have a blank cheque to do whatever they want. That means put up your taxes. Reverse all the changes I made to get us to net zero in a sensible way. Right? Reverse all the progress we made on illegal migration.
Rishi Sunak speaking to Christopher Hope earlier on. Well, on the subject of illegal migration, Sir Keir Starmer has told GB News a Labour government would work with whoever is in power in France to tackle the migrant journeys across the Channel. He says the issue is much more than just about borders.
Record numbers of people are coming here in small boats. He's lost control of our borders, literally lost control, not only of the numbers that are coming, but also who's coming. And so this is not just a border issue, it's a national security issue. The deterrent is smashing the gangs that are running this vile trade so that nobody gets into a boat to cross the Channel. The Prime Minister is simply interested in a gimmick, the Rwanda scheme, for people who've already arrived here, a few hundred people.
Sir Keir Starmer. Meanwhile, the former Newcastle United owner, Sir John Hall, has switched his support to Reform UK after previously donating tens of thousands of pounds to the Conservative Party. He was cheered on at a Reform speech near Sunderland where the party leader Nigel Farage was speaking. Mr Farage said it was a privilege to welcome Sir John into the family and said he'd made a substantial donation to the party's campaign. Sir John said he feels the Tories have let him down.
The Conservative Party has let me down. They've been a failure for the last 14 years, and they don't speak now for my English is my way of life, which I feel is under threat. And I looked around, basically, who I find to speak for me, and Reform Party, I feel, and Nigel's the only ones who are going to speak about saving my English culture.
Sir John Hall. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst, back in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly Middlehurst. Facing opinion polls worse than any confronted by a major party leader, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, may be commended for continuing to fight to retain office. And yesterday evening was widely thought to have won the debate with Sir Keir Starmer on the BBC. In today's interview with GB News, he dismissed the thought that he might suffer a Portillo moment in his own seat, losing his place in the next Parliament, attacked Keir Starmer on taxes and defence, and claimed progress for his own government in reducing immigration. Nonetheless, the opinion polls offer grim reading for the Conservative Party. Some of the methodology being used at this election is unfamiliar to many of us, and time will tell whether it is insightful and reliable. The one thing on which Conservative and Labour agree is that we should disregard the polls when we vote. Although Conservatives really mean, please be wary of the Labour supermajority, which is indicated by the polls, and Labour really means don't fail to vote, assuming that those opinion polls are right. Whilst Labour and Conservative may have struggled to find news stories for each day, and whilst Sir Ed Davey has largely confined himself to self-deprecating stunts, Nigel Farage, leading the Reform Party, renews the agenda each day. He's recently chastised the government for paying money to France, allegedly for them to deter illegal cross-channel migration, whilst in fact the French authorities apparently escort dinghies crammed with migrants to the international median line in the English Channel. Today, Farage has been condemning the economic and social costs of pandemic lockdown, another issue on which he hopes to dislodge disillusioned Tories and maybe Labour supporters too. We will discuss that later in the programme. And I'll conclude today's programme by speaking to Lord Faulkner, the man who went from being Tony Blair's flatmate to Lord Chancellor of the United Kingdom. I'll ask him whether it takes Tony Blair to tell Labour the definition of a woman, whether we can trust Sir Keir Starmer, who at the last election supported Jeremy Corbyn, and whether Labour or Britain could cope with a Starmer supermajority. GB News' political editor Christopher Hope spoke to the Prime Minister earlier today, and here are excerpts from what he had to say.
Last night is Keir Starmer just does not have a plan for government. On the economy, no answers. On immigration, absolutely no answers.
Well, 9
on
times you
welfare,
asked him on immigration.
he can't tell you what he's going to do. I've got a very clear plan for what I'm going to do with illegal migrants. They don't get to stay in our country. They should be removed. He can't tell you what he's going to do. On welfare, the guy thinks that you can't make a penny of savings from the welfare budget. That's just clearly not right. That's why I want to build on the progress we've made, cut people's taxes, and last night people could see the choice very clearly. The only poll that does matter is on the 4th of July, right? But what I'd say is, look, if those polls that you're talking about, right, end up happening on polling day, that means handing Labour a blank cheque. Blank cheque. You can't get it back, but I'd say to everyone watching that those polls aren't destiny. Right? If I'm everyone's Prime Minister, I go to that NATO summit, increasing our defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, because this is the most dangerous time our country has faced in decades. We need to keep people safe. We need to get our allies to invest more. Keir Starmer's your Prime Minister. He goes to that NATO summit. What's the first thing he's done? Cut defence spending. When people are cheating at gambling, it is illegal. We have laws against that. The Gambling Commission investigate people who they suspect of doing that, and they should do that. When I learned about all of this, I was furious. Like everyone would be furious. The idea that people would do something like that is just the antithesis of what public service is all about. I've been your Prime Minister, everyone's Prime Minister, for 18 months. In that time, we've taken significant action. Net migration was down last year, the first full year I was in office, and this year, thanks to the reforms that I've put in place, the number of visas we've issued is down by 30%. That has never happened. And as I said the other night, if Labour win, the people smugglers and the criminal gangs are going to need a bigger boat. Do not surrender our borders to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. What Nigel Farage said about Putin was completely wrong. Plays into Putin's hands. Putin is someone who has deployed nerve agents on the streets of Britain just the other day, doing deals with North Korea.
Finally, your message for GB News viewers. They're watching this interview here. They're worried about immigration, the content, the economy around. I mean, can't Labour do that as well? Are Labour offering a more convincing case now than they have done in recent elections?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that the Labour-run Welsh Parliament have banned GB News. And I'll just say this, right? I get that people are frustrated with my party, with me. It's been a difficult few years with COVID, the war in Ukraine. We haven't got everything right. We haven't made as much progress as we would have liked in some areas. But this is not a by-election. Your vote can make a difference. This is a choice about our country's future and the impact it will have on your family finances. Do not give Labour a blank cheque to do what they want. Do not surrender to them.
So that was the Prime Minister. Joining me now, GB News' political editor Christopher Hope, as well as my panel, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the journalist and Conservative peer Paul Goodman. Christopher, I think we were all pretty wide-eyed watching that interview. It's as though we had not seen this Rishi Sunak before, or certainly I don't think we've seen him during this campaign. I think we've kind of established that he sounds and looks completely different from how he's been until now. So my question is why? Do you know what's gone on in the background? Who's been talking to him and saying what?
Something has happened because I went up there on Monday to Edinburgh, saw Rishi Sunak gave quite a lacklustre speech, addressed 6 journalists in the room, 5 questions about the betting scandal. He made no attempt to try and change the subject, talk about what he's bothered about, and then suddenly on Wednesday he comes out the traps and goes for the jugular with Keir Starmer and carries that into that meeting in the pub with GB News this morning, fuelled by a full English breakfast, he told me this morning, which is very rare for him, and some muesli and berries. But I think he's just, I don't know, is he seeing the finishing line in sight? Has he got a chance? Has he got a new idea? The new idea appears to be targeting 150,000 people who he says have changed their mind, it'll have a big bearing on the election. You're rolling your eyes, Michael Portillo.
I roll my eyes because politicians always say this. Of course, it is true the election is settled by 150,000 people, but you can't get at those 150,000 people without getting at the millions amongst whom they swim.
Well, he seemed to think they're on GB News. He said, we did say at one point, the viewers watching this, he thinks they're in the Red Wall. I don't know what or where they are, but he thinks they're through our channel.
Nigel, I'd like to ask you, do you think this has been researched? The word that he used, I think, 17 times in the debate was surrender, don't surrender to Labour. When you asked him, you said you've used it 17 times last night. He then used it 4 times in his answer to you.
Didn't say why.
Surrender, 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 surrender.
Yes.
Do you think this word has been researched?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the idea being that they're still trying to get rid of this notion of the supermajority, and on the basis of that, it's a damage limitation exercise to rescue as many Tory MPs as they possibly can. It doesn't feel like this is a winning message. It's just that, and the 150,000 that you mentioned there. I mean, under first past the post, it's true that 150,000 votes can make a difference in the most marginal constituencies, but not when there's a poll lead of 20%. So it is in itself a nonsense, but I think that the message all the way through now is, please vote some of our Tory MPs back.
Paul, just to remind us and viewers too, that many people have voted. I have voted. I mean, it's awfully late in the election to change your tone and come out with at least a damage-limiting message. Do you feel a regret that he didn't start? I mean, let's do a thought experiment here. Supposing instead of appearing in the rain outside Downing Street, he'd appeared in the dry inside Downing Street and sounded like that.
It can be like this from time to time. In the last stages of the leadership election against Liz Truss, he was very much in that vein, dropping the glottal stop, lots of rights, lots of very direct points. He can do it. Intermittently, and sadly in this election, he's done it rather late. I don't know if his confidence was buoyed by having been done well in the debate. I don't know if he was also buoyed up a bit by the fact that Chris is a very fair interviewer and doesn't try to talk across him and interrupt him. It gave him a chance to make his points. But your fundamental point is right. This is now very late in the day.
Christopher, did you get any hints from around the interview? You sit down with the Prime Minister, the man in the pub, and we see the formality of it. How did you feel about him off camera? How was he before he started? How was he after he ended?
Quite jolly, quite relaxed. He wasn't too rushed. Normally every time his time is calibrated. No, he seemed up for it, and he discussed how we're going to do it. And we'd be a chat in the pub, but I would let him speak and try and interject when I could. I thought he was, he seemed very relaxed, and he can be quite edgy when he's tired, I think. And another camera in front of his face. Who is this person speaking to me? Understandably, but I thought, he seemed quite relaxed. I've been struck, having been all over the place with the Prime Minister and with Sir Keir Starmer, is the safety-first nature of his campaign. He's doing meetings and with like he's Prime Minister still. So, when inflation hit 2%, an amazing moment for his administration, he went off to Suffolk to a nuclear power station, didn't go to a market and talk to people affected by the cost of living crisis. And he's campaigning like a Prime Minister, not like he wants to win people's votes, and I don't understand why that is.
We're missing that old soapbox that John Major got out.
We thought would emerge, actually.
Nigel, how will Labour respond to this idea that the public is being invited not to surrender to Labour, not to surrender to Keir Starmer? Firstly, do you think Labour will be in the least bit bothered by it? Is it something that requires a counter, do you think?
Well, yes, because what they're bothered about is that in the event that people think Labour are just going to walk it, they're not going to vote Labour. So Labour have now changed their tack and are talking about the fact that, the polls are much nearer than we think they are, that don't believe them too much. You've got to keep voting for us, otherwise you may not get a Labour government. So that's their counter-attack to what the Tories are doing. I mean, both are in a sense, a bit of a nonsense, aren't they? That the voters will go out there, again, because of our first-past-the-post system. They can vote tactically in marginal constituencies, but really there's no kind of, without PR, there's no way that they can start influencing the final result in that way.
Paul, the message appeared to be don't surrender to Starmer. But what it really meant was, don't vote for reform.
I think there's a lot in that. I thought there was a slightly Dunkirk, Dad's Army feel to the word surrender. There's a slightly sort of, Union Jack Westcoat, John Bull feeling to it. So undoubtedly, there was an effort there to get at that sort of reform voter and try to make them think twice about either not voting or voting Labour.
I think it is. I poo-poo the idea and I roll my eyes at the idea of 150,000 voters. But I find it quite plausible that there are voters who, on the morning of the election, won't know whether to vote Conservative or Reform. I find that a plausible proposition because, in many ways, I can see how voters float across, those two possibilities.
It is plausible, and usually you get a sort of slight row back for the government and talk about hidden Tory voters. Is it right to think about hidden Reform voters, about people who've not declared for Reform, who feel it's somehow not respectable to say that you're going to support Reform? I don't know, but this is a very complicated election in terms of who turns out to vote on the day and how it affects the result. And Labour's worry about their voters just not turning up, because they think Labour are going to win anyway, is a quite reasonable one.
Christopher Hope, I found it a pretty dull election. Not very much has happened, except perhaps that Reform has caught up, maybe even possibly overtaken the Conservatives. Are you, as a person who has to live through this, you've been at it for 5 weeks, are you cheered by this interview in the sense that it was quite lively? Is it possible it opens up a slightly livelier last weekend chapter in the general election?
I think so, and I think that the PM actually was challenging the Labour leader on what would you do? You attack Rwanda as being a waste of money, but what would you actually do? Would you negotiate with the Taliban? They were lines that landed very well last night. He repeatedly said, what's your answer? I think the mistake has been that they've allowed the polls to lead their argument against Labour by saying for the fear of a supermajority, rather than taking on Starmer on his arguments and saying, well, what you're offering on illegal migration is basically the Tory party's offering without Rwanda. What else would you do? And I thought that was compelling. I think if we get back to debating the two parties on ideas, it's quite refreshing.
I thought another very good line from the Prime Minister was referring to the migrants. You're going to need a bigger boat.
It didn't land, though, in the audience. It's a Jaws joke, isn't it? But
it is indeed a Jaws joke. Thank you very much to you, Christopher, and the panel, Paul Goodman and Nigel Nelson. Coming up, Labour thinks that £28 billion of net zero spending is a tiny amount. We'll be speaking to a sustainable investment manager to find out if this tiny amount really is a drop in the ocean when it comes to climate change.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Wiltshire police have arrested 2 people after they sprayed orange paint on Stonehenge.
Well, Just Stop Oil have shared a video saying it's to get the incoming government to sign up to a legally binding treaty to phase out fossil fuels by 2030. Of course, Stonehenge famously associated with oil, gas. I think the 5,000-year-old Neolithic Britons were prolific users of the internal combustion engine, and they drilled for lots of oil, so it makes perfect sense, of course.
Yes, we're going to be joined by Jill Taylor, a spokesperson from Just Stop Oil. Jill, thank you very much indeed. What on earth is this all about? This is just criminal activity under the guise of some kind of activism.
No, that paint will be washed off really easily. So it's not long-lasting damage at all, unlike the damage that is being done now by the fossil fuel industry and just keeping burning fossil fuels, putting more CO2 into the atmosphere. You're right, the Neolithic people were not prolific users of fossil fuels. They did not cause the kind of damage that we're causing now. That's all been within since the Industrial Revolution in the 150 years.
So because
this is when the damage has been done.
So because this stuff can be washed off, ergo there's no issue here. Well, Stonehenge aren't particularly happy about this. They've come out on their social media page and they say Stonehenge is protected by the Ancient Monuments Act and it is a criminal offence to damage the stones. There are also multiple rare lichen species growing on the stones that are also protected. So this isn't good for nature, is it?
I think you're getting things so out of perspective here. What isn't good for nature is the damage we're doing now, and what's not good for nature globally is not good for you, it's not good for me, and it's not good for the people watching this program.
The People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm Michael Portillo. Labour's Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, has described the $28 billion that was scrapped from Labour's Green Investment Plan as a tiny amount in a recording that was leaked to The Telegraph.
We're still absolutely committed to it. It's still one of the top 5 priorities, and it's going to be a huge amount of effort to get there because we'll have to move quite quickly. But a lot of the coverage in the news was about that specific 28, which, because journalists like conflict, made it sound as if we basically jumped the whole thing, but we definitely haven't. Because some people would say that like 28 billion isn't enough. No, it's tiny. Like I've got people who work hundreds of billions of pounds. We need some more.
Hundreds of millions of pounds, apparently. Well, as I discussed last week with the former Environment Secretary, George Eustace, the Institute for Government has projected the total cost of achieving net zero by 2050 will be £1.4 trillion, but the savings from the transition will equate to £1.1 trillion. If you take one from the other, the total cost of net zero is, on that calculation, £321 billion. So, as Mr Jones says, such numbers do make the £28 billion originally allocated by Labour sound very tiny indeed. I'm joined by James Alexander, Chief Executive of the UK Sustainable Investment and Finance Association. Welcome back to GB News. Thanks very much for being with us. There's been a little bit about climate change during the course of the election. At a launch the other day of the Labour Party, Jim Ratcliffe of Manchester United and INEOS laughed out loud at the idea that we could have a green production of electricity on the target, on the timetable that's being proposed. We have had Stellantis saying that it may have to pull out of production of vehicles in the United Kingdom because they're going to be fined if they produce too many non-electric vehicles, and demand for electric vehicles seems to be going down. Can net zero be achieved on anything like the timetable being proposed by either Labour or the Conservatives?
Yes, I mean, it has to be. And the reason why it has to be is because the challenge that we face is so significant. But more importantly, it's a huge economic opportunity for us and for the country. You know, we're seeing this framed, and you framed it a moment ago as a cost. This is not a cost. This is about getting investment, private investment into the UK. And there's a huge wall of capital. Our members have, you know, trillions of pounds that they need to invest around the world. And at the moment, they're not looking at the UK as an investment destination. And the reason why is because the UK doesn't have the right policies on sustainability that are about driving the economy forwards into a greener future that will align with where the rest of the world is going.
OK, let's take the two examples that I came up with. Generation of electricity. How will you achieve net zero on anything like the timescales suggested by Labour or Conservative? With what?
Well, so we know that a lot of the technology that we need is already there. What we now need to do...
Which ones?
Well, the renewable infrastructure, the solar, the battery storage, the other electricity storage, the wind turbines. These are very significantly advanced in technology at this point.
Wind turbines are awfully useful on days when it's windy. Solar is awfully useful in sunny countries. But many days the wind doesn't blow and we don't have much sun.
Well, so this doesn't need to happen. This transition is very gradual. What we're doing is we're developing, in the process, we're developing the technology that will allow us to store the energy. And the good thing is that that's all investment.
Store it where?
Either in batteries, there's many other ways of storing technology.
Which are the other ways?
My expertise is in investment. And what I can tell you...
Tell me, how do you store electricity?
Well, what I can tell you is that there are...
What acreage of batteries would you require? Or what storage facility? I mean, you can store energy, can't you, by pumping water up mountains. What does it cost to install a facility like that?
So, well, what I can tell you is that it's not a cost, it's an investment. And that is because we have got people across the industry, the financial services industry, that are already looking at investing in energy storage. And can I tell you why they're not doing it? Because we haven't yet got the UK in a position where those investments can actually work. Reason why? We haven't got the planning rules in place where these things can get planning permission. But more importantly, we do not yet have the grid capacity that will allow us to do that. And so we need to rapidly fix those things so that we can attract huge walls of investment into the UK.
But you're telling me all the things that we don't have, which was rather my point, that it's not achievable on the timescale suggested either by Labour or by the Conservatives.
I don't think anyone's pretending this is going to be easy. But I think
I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm saying it's
what's important is that it's possible and that the money and the investment is there that's going to allow this to happen.
OK, I mean, let's turn to electric cars. The government's proposal has been to phase out cars driven by hydrocarbons within quite a brief period of time. What is happening at the moment is that people are not buying electric cars at anything like the rate that was predicted. That may be partly because they're worried about charging them. They may not have charging facilities. But now the government is committed to working against the market. So it is going to fine car companies for producing non-electric vehicles when the people have decided they don't want to buy them.
No, that's not the way that this has happened. What the government's done, and it was a very sensible policy, was to have the 2030 electric vehicle target mandate. What that meant was that investors had the confidence to come here and invest in all the infrastructure that was required to make it possible to run electric cars. Now, obviously, you can't have electric cars without the plug-in points. How do you get those? You need private investors to come in and help make that possible across the country. That was beginning to happen. Huge amounts of capital were being deployed because investors had the confidence that with those targets set by government, that there'd be customers for their electric vehicle plug-in points. That also it was creating a whole.
They don't have that confidence now.
Yes, and the reason why is because that target's been rolled back.
To 2035.
And so in one swoop, it really damaged investor confidence. And the whole of investment is a confidence game because investors are looking at investing pensions, people's pensions, our pensions, for the long term into infrastructure in the UK.
I'm sure you understand investors, and maybe because I used to be a politician, I understand ordinary people. What's happening is drivers are not buying these vehicles.
And when did that start to tip down? At the point that the electric vehicle target was changed. The target was driving. The target was doing its job of driving activity, building more clients for the electric vehicle infrastructure, therefore making the infrastructure more viable, therefore making more infrastructure be financed and built. That's the whole point of the target, and that is when government, investors, and corporates all work together in lockstep to move things forward. And that is exactly what we need to do if we're to achieve this transition on energy, on transport, and in other areas. You get investors, you get companies. And crucially, you need the government and the policy landscape to make that possible, to build that investor confidence, which allows the investment to flow. And that is what will drive this country and economy into the future. And that is the positive thing. Now, the alternative is we don't do those things, and the country stays in the slow lane. We stay relying on fossil fuels whose prices spike, and whenever there's geopolitical turmoil, we have the long-term challenge of not knowing what energy is going to cost, and that creates the challenge where people feel they can't invest further.
Wouldn't we be joining the United States and China in the slow lane? Because neither of those countries is committed to the targets that we have.
Well, so what the United States has done is put trillions of dollars into the Inflation Reduction Act.
It has not committed itself under law as the United Kingdom has, and neither has China.
But it's about...
And you talk about the whole point.
In the United States, it's about the
whole point
actions.
when those countries are not doing it?
Well, so what we found ourselves, what the United States is doing, the actions of the United States, is actually hoovering investment across the Atlantic from the UK. We are not an attractive destination for capital at this point. And the reason why is partly because we haven't got the government policies in place to make the UK attractive, but also because America has done a great job of attracting capital with its Inflation Reduction Act. Now, we have got to find a way in the UK to make ourselves a comparatively better investment destination for global private investors with trillions of pounds to spend and to invest. We've got to find a way of making ourselves an investable destination.
Thank you very much indeed. That's James Alexander, who's the Chief Executive of the UK Sustainable Investment and Finance Association. Coming up, Nigel Farage was on the campaign trail in the North East today. How did the Geordies, Mackems and Smoggies receive the leader of Reform UK? Stay tuned to find out.
Hi there, time for the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Cool Atlantic winds return across the UK this weekend. That means blustery showers, especially for northern parts, but some drier and brighter interludes too, especially across southern parts. Low pressure, an unseasonably deep low, is now crossing northern Scotland. Around the south of that low, we've got these strong winds bringing unpleasant conditions really across Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England. Spells of rain or showers continuing through the night. The strongest winds pushing through northern and northeast Scotland. Meanwhile, further south, it's mostly dry, apart from 1 or 2 showers for Wales and the southwest. Patchy cloud, but a cooler night for many of us, so 11 to 13 Celsius by dawn. Now we start the day with those winds and the outbreaks of rain continuing across northwest Scotland. The Northwest Highlands seeing prolonged and at times heavy rain, and the rain then sweeping into Orkney and Shetland later. Some shelter from the rain across eastern and southern Scotland, but a few showers here, brightening up across Northern Ireland compared with the last 24 hours. A few sunny spells, but also 1 or 2 showers. A few showers there for Wales, Northern England, perhaps the southwest, but the further southeast you are, the drier it will be, the brighter it will be. There'll be quite a lot of cloud, to be honest, across the UK during the day, but some brightness will develop, especially towards the southwest by the afternoon. Further north, any rain tends to break up into showers, but there will be some heavy downpours for the Highlands, Grampians, the northwest of Scotland, and that strong wind continues, making it feel on the cool side. In the south, where we've got some sunshine and lighter winds, 23 Celsius, so not too unpleasant. We start Saturday with a lot of fine weather, best of the sunshine the southeast, as well as parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. This finger of cloud pushes into northern and western England as well as Wales to bring some light rain by the afternoon. But for many this weekend is looking mostly settled, if a lot cooler compared with the weather of recent days.
On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party. Congratulations to the GB News winners at this year's Trick Awards.
And the winner of Interview of the Year is... Alistair Stewart reveals his heartbreaking diagnosis to Camilla Tominey.
And the winner is GB News Breakfast. And the winner is Nigel Farage.
And thank you to you, our GB News viewers and listeners, for making us the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm Michael Portillo. As ever, Nigel Farage was busy making headlines today, addressing a Reform UK rally at the Rainton Arena in the northeast of England. The leader of the party, projected in one poll to win 18 seats, had this to say to a crowd of 1,000 people.
The Tories say we're in economic trouble because of the pandemic. But hang on, you didn't need to lock us down for a second and a third time. I actually believe the long-term economic and psychological damage from lockdowns 2 and 3 represents the biggest mistake any British government, supported by the opposition, has ever made in peacetime.
Farage also made headlines when he called for a confrontation with the French over channel crossings. Whilst Britain pays France to suppress illegal immigration, vessels operating for the French state escort illegal migrants in their dinghies towards Britain. I'm rejoined now by my panel, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the journalist and Conservative peer Paul Goodman. Paul, is this true, that in return for the hundreds of millions that we're paying France, I mean, I've seen photographs, but they're only photographs, of what appear to be vessels working for the French state, which are escorting illegal migrants to the median line in the English Channel. That's certainly what Nigel Farage is asking us to believe.
It's certainly true that we have given money to the French to try to deal with a problem. I remember that happening when Priti Patel was Home Secretary. What I don't understand from Nigel Farage so clearly, and I've been trying to think about it all day, is what his solution to the problem is, regardless of what we are or are not doing with the French.
Well, he might want his money back.
He might want his money back. He might also want a solution that's completely impracticable, which seems to be the case, which is simply trying to force the boats back on the French. OK, you try and do that, what happens then?
Well, but there is a halfway house. I mean, it is common ground between us and the French that these sailings are illegal.
Well, they're not.
They're not illegal.
No, I mean, migrants may become illegal when they get to this country. It is not illegal under international law to sail across the Channel in a dinghy.
Even though you're clearly imperiling your life. I mean, I remember Nigel saying that if he tried to sail in his little boat from any French port, he would be absolutely hemmed around by bureaucracy and red tape.
Yes, but
which would prevent him sailing in his little boat. But you're saying if 50 people set out
to claim asylum
in imminent danger of capsizing. Arranged and financed by a criminal gang, that there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing illegal.
Nothing illegal. Under international law, nothing illegal. And the Illegal Migration Act, which is badly called, actually makes that point. It doesn't say that these are illegal. What it says is they're inadmissible when they arrive in this country. At that point, they can well become illegal migrants, but they're not illegal migrants while they're in the Channel.
So, if you were the Prime Minister...
Yeah.
And you'd paid hundreds of millions to the French...
500 million, yeah.
500 million, yes, 500 million. And you saw the dinghies leaving France not only unhindered, but actually helped, escorted towards the median line. Would you not want your money back?
No, on the basis that they're not escorting them. What they're doing is they're standing by. The French attitude to all this is they work under international maritime law. That means that they don't come to the aid of those. They don't aid the dinghies, but they only come to their aid
if they get into trouble.
If they get into trouble or they're asked to. Other than that, they're purely standing by. So they're not escorts. They're not trying to usher them across the Channel. It's nonsense. And the rest of the money is being used for 500 extra French police. We've also got a detention centre being built. It won't come online till 2026, but we have actually got that happening. That's where the money is going.
Nigel, you've given a brilliant explanation, if I may say so, but I'm not at all sure that you hadn't rather helped Nigel Farage with your explanation, because it just strikes me as so completely absurd that should be the case.
There's another oddity about the Farage argument, which is that the picture you're painting is as though the French were watching every single boat go out. Now, I would want to know how many boats the French are actually watching, because there will be numbers going off from the beaches of Normandy all the time that are not being observed by French boats. That is part of the problem.
May I switch the subject to Nigel Farage's other subject, which was the damage done by the second and third lockdowns. Did you have a sympathy with that position?
That was a really interesting argument that Farage made. It was the second or third time I've seen him argue something that's contrary to the instincts of his supporters. So I heard him lauding the French healthcare system in a debate the other evening, so, which, again, is not really where they are. And this was an instance of him making an argument that a lot of Reform voters at the time would have found sympathy with. They would have wanted more extensive lockdowns. But actually, on the subject of the actual...
How do you judge that? Have they been polled?
Yes, you have.
I'm a potential Reform voter, and I disliked lockdowns very much and argued against them at the time very much.
There has been polling on it, and most of the opposition to lockdown at the time, the articulate opposition, came from articulate, libertarian-minded journalists at the rather top end of the scale, not from hope you recognise yourself, not from sort of ordinary voters. But I did have a sympathy for his argument in retrospect, in that he was very careful not to apply this to the first lockdown, when we knew rather less about COVID, and when there was a better case for locking down while you tried to get to grips with what was going on.
It seemed to go down well with the crowd tonight, this particular point. We could hear him being cheered and applauded for the point. And Nigel, what do you make of it? I mean, first of all, do you happen to think that the second and third lockdowns were pretty damaging economically and psychologically? And whether you do or whether you don't, do you think there's potential political advantage to Farage in raising this point now?
No, because COVID hasn't really played a big part of this election anyway. I mean, COVID is past. Well, it's still with us, but it's not with us in a pandemic form. I mean, if you look at the lockdowns, Nigel, interestingly, did keep away from the first lockdown. But even if you look at the second and third lockdowns, every time we had a lockdown, infections went down, and a few weeks later, deaths went down too. Lockdowns quite patently worked. And the question should be, especially with the third lockdown, did we do it soon enough? We should have done it in at the end of December 2020.
You haven't mentioned costs there at all. You don't think that cost ought to be brought into the argument at all. I can't believe we're talking about lockdowns in 2024, but here we are.
All right. Bring costs into it. No, I wasn't bringing costs into it. I was bringing human life into it. And had we locked down, the third lockdown...
Yes, but human life has a value. If you're going to build a motorway, you'd say this motorway saves so many lives a year and it costs so many millions, and then you come up with a figure as to whether it's worth doing. We never did that in the pandemic. We didn't say these are the lives that are being saved and this is the life expectancy of the lives being saved and this is what it's costing.
So what you'd like to do there is put a cost on those lives that we saved? Right. OK, well...
which is what we do in all other fields.
Yeah, but if you're talking about the numbers of people who are likely to die, so we lost, what, 270,000 people during COVID. Without the vaccine, we could have lost another 500,000.
Yes, the vaccine was indeed our great saviour. And not even Nigel Farage is making an argument about the vaccine. Thank you very much to you both. Very good humoured debate there. Paul Goodman and Nigel Nelson. Coming up, the polls are suggesting a 1997-style Labour landslide, at least. After the break, I'll reminisce with a man who knows Tony Blair extremely well. Don't go anywhere, please.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
History lecturers at the University of Liverpool have been advised to problematise whiteness and heterosexuality in their seminars. They are saying that you should be guilty if you're white and heterosexual. Not using the long words they use, but that's kind of what they're saying.
Yeah, but do you know what? History in this country is concerned with more and has been lived by more white people and more heterosexuals, right? And that's the history. I'll tell you something else, Dawn. This is Russell Group University material here. This is Liverpool. It's a really good university. Mm-hmm. The thing that really got me going apart from this, and I thought it was an AI generation of words input into a system to come up with from something. It's ridiculous. The main issue I have is the verb problematise. I've never heard of that before. Yeah. So they should be prioritising grammar. Let's get first principles back in there firstly.
It's just promoting anti-racism.
It's not, Amy.
It is. Wait. It's just bringing the marginalised voices into the discussion. So
no, what they're saying is look at British history through the optic of
all perspectives. So let's look at it from the perspective of a queer person growing up. Let's look at it from the perspective of somebody from...
But that's not the majority.
When I actually looked at the evidence, it's all about unpacking bias. And you have to admit there has been a white bias in history.
No, there hasn't, because the facts...
From a white perspective...
Amy, the facts are, in history, most people in this country are white and heterosexual.
Of course, but then there's still...
So that's the history.
...voices that deserve to be brought into the discussion as much as the dominant...
Look,
like, that's all decolonising the curriculum is hearing all sides of the argument. Surely we at GB News love. We celebrate that. That's what we do.
We do, but we're not telling anybody it's bad to be white or it's bad to be...
Exactly.
That is not what...
Amy, it is. It is.
Amy.
The People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm Michael Portillo with the polls showing a Labour landslide. Many have drawn comparisons with the 1997 election when Tony Blair became Prime Minister with a massive majority. Yet things do seem different to me today. In 1997, the country was awash with optimism that a change of government would bring about great change. Things can only get better, as the song went. I just don't detect that mood today, nor do I see the enthusiasm for Sir Keir Starmer that was clearly widespread for Tony Blair. To check my impressions, I'm joined by one who was and is a good friend of Tony Blair and who would go on to serve as his Lord Chancellor. Welcome, Lord Faulkner. Charlie, great to see you. On this point about whether the optimism in the country about what's going to happen if there's a change of government, do you agree that the optimism that was felt in 1997, I thought rather naively at the time, but never mind, that is absent today?
Yes, I do. I think the mood is much bleaker at the moment. I mean, I think there's so many differences with 1997. I mean, this is from my point of view as a Labour supporter. We were jolly uncertain about what would happen in 1997. We'd been bruised by the experience in 1992 when a lot of people, possibly including ourselves, had thought that we would win, and then we had surprisingly lost. And polling wasn't so accurate in those days. I don't know if you remember, but in 1992, there was a exit poll, that's after the polls had closed, on the BBC and I think on the ITV, saying it was going to be a hung parliament. And in fact, in 1992, the Conservatives won an overall majority. So polling was not reliable, or not as seen as reliable as it is now. So we were uncertain and unsure. But we did think we could win, and we hoped we would win. You'd been in...
But your uncertainty, which I think was a kind of rather sort of professional and metropolitan thing, you didn't dare hope. But in the country, there was tremendous hope.
Yes.
I mean, the song "Things Can Only Get Better" was heartfelt. People really... As Tony Blair went up Downing Street, you remember Glad handing his way up Downing Street.
I do.
People were celebrating. They thought everything was going to come right. As I say, I thought that was naive. But I don't think it's going to be like that if Sir Keir goes up Downing Street on Friday morning.
And I think that's partly because how have politicians fared since 1997? They've not fared that well. For example, we've had the expenses scandal that makes the idea of somebody like Tony Blair, who the hope of the nation rested upon his shoulders. People believed that he could bring change. And, I mean, you say it was naive, but he did bring very, very substantial change. People have got a much darker view, I think, now about politicians. It's hard to imagine any politician having that sort of uncaveated hope resting on his shoulders. And part of the reason was because he seemed so fresh and so new in relation to it.
I wonder, though, if there are some matters that relate ad hominem, things that relate to the man himself, relate to Sir Keir Starmer. I think he probably has sustained some damage, has he not, from that question about why did you support Jeremy Corbyn at the last general election. By the way, you were in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet, weren't you? Perhaps you can understand the answer that he gave. What is the explanation that a man can support Jeremy Corbyn at one election and then be so different at the following one?
Well, I mean, you remember Tony Blair became elected, first of all, as a MP who had supported the, was it called by Gerald Kaufman, the longest suicide note in history, which is Michael Foot's 1983 election. If you're Labour, you support the Labour candidate for Prime Minister.
Well, so I don't just referred to people's cynicism. No wonder they're cynical when you say this.
But why do you think people... Do you think people don't believe that we often... And I don't know if you remember, you might have been a politician at some time yourself, Michael. Do people support everything that their Prime Ministers say? Not necessarily. But they recognise that we have a party system whereby you pool your disagreements because you agree on enough to make it worthwhile. And agreeing in 2017 or 19 that it would be better to have a Labour government than a Tory government is a perfectly reasonable position to take up, it seems to me. But that's not... that's my explanation. That would be my position as to why I supported Jeremy Corbyn. You must have had some very considerable doubts about some of the Prime Ministers that you served.
Well, this is not about me, but I don't think... I don't think I would... I didn't need to have doubts about, let's say, John Major, as you would need to have about Jeremy Corbyn. I don't think they are essentially comparable. Tell me this, do you think...
Were you an MP when Ian Duncan Smith... Did he never run in an election?
No, he didn't. He didn't run in an election.
Were you an MP when he was the leader of the Labour? Sorry,
and he got more votes than I did for the leadership.
Yeah.
But by the way, I'm the interviewer.
Sorry, this is an interesting discussion. But I mean, I'm drawing attention to the fact that party politicians have to do things.
Do you think it took Tony Blair, like a deus ex machina, God arriving in a machine, to tell the Labour Party what a woman was, to tell Keir Starmer what a woman was? He came up with a definition, which was rather straightforward one. I think it involved penises and vaginas. It seemed fairly straightforward to me. But did the Labour Party really need its ex-leader to come and tell it what a woman is?
No, and that whole debate about transgender people is a slightly fake debate. The question, in a way, everybody knows what a biological man or a biological woman is, and that's not a difficulty. The question is, how does society deal with people who want to be a different sex to their biological original sex? And you recognise, in addressing that issue, you've got to address the absolutely legitimate concerns of, for example, biological women who want to have safe spaces, and they want to be absolutely secure in that knowledge, and that's the dilemma for the law. But nobody is...
Bridget Phillipson today was asked 8 times by Nick Ferrari whether a trans woman who has a penis, who's in a restaurant which has a male and a female loo, which of the 2 loos should that person use? She was not able to answer it after 8 goes. Are you able to answer it?
Sorry, could you... I didn't miss out...
A trans woman
yes,
with a penis...
Yeah.
And there are 2 loos, one's male and one is female. Which should she use?
Well, the one that causes least offence, I would have thought, would be the answer.
You're not answering it either. Well, least offence to whom?
To other people and to herself. Mostly that would...
Well, how do you do that? By taking a poll in the restaurant? How do you know what causes
are you saying then the only answer is she's got to go to the gents' loo?
What I'm saying
is that your answer?
What I'm saying
well, you're criticising me for not being able to answer the question.
Well, only because I think you're speaking for the Labour Party. What I think people... The serious point here is that Labour is likely to come into office next week.
That is what the polls suggest, but...
And lots of questions like this have not been answered. Labour is saying we want to make it easier for people to transition.
But I don't think the answer in relation to that sort of question is, well, it's obviously straightforward. The trans woman, she has got to go to the male thing. Even though it might well be that there would be no offence caused in a particular restaurant, that she would behave in a completely discreet way. I think your position is, no, you've got to say she's got to go to the gentleman's.
I have no position. I'm simply asking the question. Yeah. We've got a matter of seconds to go.
OK.
Can I just ask you, what is your prediction for the election? Obviously, I'm talking about seats.
I can't give up. I just don't know. But I mean, the polls are making it absolutely clear Labour are going to get a lot of seats. But I think there may well be surprises in relation to this. I wonder whether or not Reform at the moment may get more seats. I just don't know than people are expecting.
OK, we'll go with that. Lord Falkland's prediction is that Reform may get more seats than people are suggesting. Next on is Patrick Christis. Patrick, are you there for me to speak to?
I am. Always for you, Michael.
That's jolly good. What are you going to be talking about this evening?
Yeah, loads to go at tonight. The junior doctor strikes. Are they killing people? And will Labour actually be able to stop them? NHS nurses as well are now suing because a sexually active man who identifies as a woman is being allowed in their changing rooms. They join me live in the studio. And Angela Rayner wants every single borough in the country to take their, quote, fair share of illegal migrants. Has Labour capitulated on illegal immigration with a week to go, Michael?
That all sounds fascinating. That's all coming up after the weather. We'll be back with more State of the Week, State of the Nation next week. For now, I'm Mike Portillo. This has been State of the Nation. Good night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, time for the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Cool Atlantic winds return across the UK this weekend. That means blustery showers, especially for northern parts, but some drier and brighter interludes too, especially across southern parts. Low pressure, an unseasonably deep low, is now crossing northern Scotland. Around the south of that low, we've got these strong winds bringing Unpleasant conditions really across Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England. Spells of rain or showers continuing through the night. The strongest winds pushing through northern and northeast Scotland. Meanwhile, further south, it's mostly dry, apart from 1 or 2 showers for Wales and the southwest. Patchy cloud, but a cooler night for many of us, so 11 to 13 Celsius by dawn. Now we start the day with those winds and the outbreaks of rain continuing across northwest Scotland. The Northwest Highlands seeing prolonged and at times heavy rain, and the rain then sweeping into Orkney and Shetland later. Some shelter from the rain across eastern and southern Scotland, but a few showers here, brightening up across Northern Ireland compared with the last 24 hours. A few sunny spells, but also 1 or 2 showers. A few showers there for Wales, Northern England, perhaps the southwest, but the further southeast you are, the drier it will be, the brighter it will be. There'll be quite a lot of cloud, to be honest, across the UK during the day, but some brightness will develop, especially towards the southwest by the afternoon. Further north, any rain tends to break up into showers, but there will be some heavy downpours for the Highlands, Grampians, the northwest of Scotland, and that strong wind continues, making it feel on the cool side. In the south, where we've got some sunshine and lighter winds, 23 Celsius, so not too unpleasant. We start Saturday with a lot of fine weather, best of the sunshine the southeast, as well as parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. This finger of cloud pushes into northern and western England as well as Wales to bring some light rain by the afternoon. But for many this weekend is looking mostly settled, if a lot cooler compared with the weather of recent days.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you can win big this summer. First, there's a fabulous £15,000 in tax-free cash to ensure this summer is special. What would you spend that on? Next, you'll also receive the latest iPhone 15 and a set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You can also enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians and the media, but it's actually about you. We won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear all sides
as you make your decision in the run-up to polling day.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel. Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to the GB News winners at this year's Trick Awards.
And the winner of Interview of the Year is... Alistair Stewart reveals his heartbreaking diagnosis to Camilla Tominey.
And the winner is GB News Breakfast. And the winner is Nigel Farage.
And thank you to you, our GB News viewers and listeners, for making us the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. It's 9 p.m. I'm Patrick Christie's. Tonight.
What do we want?
do we want it?
Junior doctors are back out on strike. Are they killing people? And will Labour be in the pocket of the unions? And
what will you do with the illegal migrants that arrive to the UK? What will you do with them? You've had 3 weeks to think of an answer. What is it?
Angela Rayner wants every UK town to take its fair share of illegal immigrants. Plus,
homeless English people not getting housed, but you have immigrants that come here that are illegal and they get housed.
Are Britain's youngsters shifting to the right? Also,
our trust believes all staff should feel welcome
and respected at work.
We want all staff to be able to be themselves.
I'm joined live by NHS nurses who are being forced to have a man in their changing rooms. They're sick of it. Also,
imagine an incoming Labour government. Future tax.
Sorry, this election's got weird, hasn't it? And which party will get people off welfare and back to work? Oh yes, and why have dodgy sausages landed the NHS in hot water? On my panel tonight is the former director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity and former UKIP MEP Stephen Wolfe, Tory peer Lord Bailey and journalist Zoe Grunwald. Oh yes, and what happens to Cristiano Ronaldo here? Oh, get ready, Britain, here we go. Will junior doctors' strikes kill more people under Labour? Next.
The top story from the GB Newsroom tonight. The Prime Minister is urging voters not to surrender to Labour, adding that this is a really important election where Britain could make a better choice. He was speaking to GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope. Rishi Sunak said if Labour wins victory, they'll reverse all the changes he's made.
People to surrender to Labour. I don't want them to surrender to their tax rises. I don't want people to surrender our borders to Labour, our welfare system to Labour, our national security to Labour. Right? I'm up for the fight. I want people to join me in that fight. Like, we should not surrender our country to this. Right? We can do better. Last year's has not been easy. I'm not saying we've got everything right. I completely understand that. But this is really important, this election. If Labour are in power, they'll have a blank cheque to do whatever they want. That means put up your taxes. Reverse all the changes I made to get us to net zero in a sensible way. Right? Reverse all the progress we made on illegal migration.
Rishi Sunak speaking earlier. Well, in other news today, the number of Metropolitan Police officers under investigation over allegedly placing bets on the timing of the general election has risen now to at least 7. The force saying one protection officer assigned to the Prime Minister was arrested last week. He's since been released on bail, but a further 6 officers have now been identified as having placed bets on the timing of the election as well. One person in England has died in the ongoing E. coli outbreak, and it's linked apparently to salad. That's according to the UK Health Security Agency. It comes after a recent outbreak which saw 86 people admitted to hospital. That's according to figures released last week. A number of food manufacturers forced today to recall all their products, in particular pre-made sandwiches, wraps and bags of salad sold in supermarkets and shops over fears that lettuce could be the link to the spread of contamination. Junior doctors in England are walking out today for the 11th time in almost a year. The 5-day strike continued in their long-running pay dispute with the government. They're asking for a 35% pay rise, which Labour has said is a non-starter for them. But the doctors say more industrial action can take place over the summer if negotiations don't move forward. The mother of missing British teenager Jay Slater says some of the money raised by crowdfunding will be withdrawn to help in the search for her son. The appeal so far has raised more than £36,000. The search for 19-year-old Jay Slater has entered its 11th day after he went missing while on holiday in Tenerife. Well, yesterday, the Guardia Civil, the Spanish police, deployed helicopters above ground and sniffer dog patrols on foot in the mountainous areas of the island where Jay is believed to have gone missing. England's football squad has been training for their first knockout game against Slovakia at the Euros. That's taking place this Sunday. The Three Lions top their group before getting into the knockout stages of the competition. They'll be without their midfielder, though. Phil Foden left training yesterday to return to the UK for the birth of his third child. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst and I'm back with more in an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome along. Now, the junior doctors are back out on strike. It is their 11th strike during their dispute with the Tories. This one will last 5 days. And despite them claiming it's not political, they've timed it to coincide with the general election. Still, at least it's not Christmas, when they also went on strike to demand a 35% pay rise. Dr Robert Lawrenson, the British Medical Association junior doctor representative, whose LinkedIn page actually describes him as doctor interested in working and doing the job, said this from the picket line.
Well, it's time for any government, anyone in power, to put down their rhetoric, to get round the table and actually present a credible offer to pay restoration. That doesn't have to be in one go. We can do that over a series of years. We're very happy to discuss a journey.
OK, well, here's some important context. The government and the BMA had agreed to independent arbitration in May, but that was put on hold when the election was called, and the union then called the strike. It has asked for a 35% pay rise to make up for what it says are 15 years of below-inflation pay rises. Junior doctors received a rise averaging nearly 9% in the last financial year. Here's what Tory Health Minister Victoria Atkins said about the strikes last night.
Been in the room with the doctors repeatedly, the Junior Doctors Committee, and they walk out. We know that what they are asking for is unreasonable for the taxpayer. It will cost £3 billion. So again, how is Labour going to fund that if they're going to meet that 35% pay rise that junior doctors are wanting? And what I want to do is, I've throughout said to Junior Doctors Committee, they call off these strikes. If they put patients first rather than their pay, then I will get straight back round the negotiating table with them once the election is over.
And here's what the Labour Party has to say.
To be fair to them, and I'm not happy about the strikes, I think these are unnecessary strikes the next 5 days. We're so close to the general election. I wanted them to wait and give me a chance, if I'm the Health Secretary, to sort this out. But we are where we are. I've said that we can negotiate on pay. They've shown a willingness to move on pay too.
Well, Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting have vowed to meet with junior doctors on day one of a Labour government. Yeah, there we go. On day one. And today, this headline emerged: striking doctors are confident Labour is listening to their pay demands. Well, this comes after both Starmer and Rayner met with union barons of different unions, it must be said, in May, and reportedly reached an agreement with them over workers' rights. What does all of that really mean, though? Doctor strikes cost lives. The last one in February saw 91,000 appointments, procedures and operations cancelled. The question is this, really, isn't it? Do you think a Labour government would stop the strikes, or would they be at the mercy of the unions? Let's get the thoughts of my panel this evening. I am joined by former MEP and the Director of the Centre of Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe. I also have Tory peer Lord Bailey, and I have got the political journalist and broadcaster Zoe Grunwald. Stephen, I'll start with you. Do you think that Labour would be able to stop the junior doctor strikes?
I think absolutely, because the junior doctor strike has been caused to maximise the embarrassment of the Conservative Party. The whole intention was not really necessarily about money as a whole. It's important for them, but it was really to be part of that whole trade union movement, which was to help bring down the Conservative government. So I would also say that there are about 10 Labour MPs who are former doctors. Maybe, just being the cynic in me, that some of those doctors are looking to their future.
OK, all right, interesting. Sean, I can see you're itching to get involved here. I'm just going to... Just a couple of facts on this. 1.4 million acute inpatient and outpatient appointments have now been rescheduled since strikes began in December 2022. There's a shout to say they are now responsible for the waiting list.
Listen, this is such a mess, and when the Labour Party talk about who's responsible for the mess, they've got to factor in the junior doctors. It's just a fact. That's what they've been doing. But there's 2 points to be made. One, if Labour magically resolve this after the election, it will look like a very political strike. And why that's a problem, the whole of the NHS is beginning to burn through its goodwill. So currently, when the NHS is in strife, it's a fault of politicians. At some point, I think, in the very near future, the public are actually going to talk to the NHS. This isn't the junior doctors versus the government. It will be junior doctors versus the public at some point. And Wes Streeting needs to be careful, because if he does something outside of the independent pay review body, it could open the door to everybody.
OK, so go on. So do you think, firstly, that these strikes are purely political? We've got days to go before the general election now. Do you think they're killing people, and can Labour sort it out?
No, I don't think they're killing people. I think the underfunding and under-resourcing of the NHS over a decade is killing people. Way before the doctors striked, way before COVID, there were serious problems with the NHS. We don't have the right number of beds, we've got a lack of capital investment, we've got the lowest real terms increases in the NHS over the past few years, and we've got record-level vacancies. All of these things are what are killing patients. You can talk about the timing of this particular strike. There's been 11 strikes in this particular period, so it's not just like this is their first strike. Clearly, this is an ongoing dispute. They were disappointed that negotiations were cancelled.
You them at the worst times, though, if I may. I mean, Christmas...
Well, strikes are supposed to be inconvenient because
but not
they're
when
supposed...
people... I would argue, not when those strikes involve people living or dying.
But the state of the NHS is causing people to die as well, and that's the point they need to make.
But they are public servants. This isn't just a fight with the government. You know, they are public.
They are public servants, and they take.
I have to say, this idea that the NHS is underfunded, it will always be able to spend more money. But you have to be clear. We give it £180 billion. I will be stunned. Any government finds more money.
Absolutely, and when you've got to factor in also the rise in immigration. The population has risen by 3 million in the past 10 years. So it doesn't matter how much the government is pumping into that. When you start pumping those figures out, you're not making into an effect a calculation of the rise in population and ill health coming from others. You're just simply using it as a flat number. That's inaccurate economics and analysis.
OK, Zoe.
I think the point is that if we have a health service which is beloved by the population, we have to fund it properly and we have to look after it. And you're right, it's not just a matter of pumping money in, it's also a matter of reforms where necessary. It's a matter of making sure that there is enough staff. At the minute, staff are hemorrhaging because there aren't enough of them, they're overworked, they're underpaid, and it's absolutely vital. We've got an ageing population. And, you know, I take your point on immigration. Actually, you know, the NHS is incredibly dependent on immigration. We have a lot of NHS workers from overseas, and they're incredibly important. And I think we really need to respect our doctors and understand not only the sacrifice they made during COVID, but how hard they've worked to catch up for the Tories' failures.
And they do work hard, but they're also paid for that, and they get very good pensions. And when we talk about the NHS and immigration, there's two things. We shouldn't be quite so proud of robbing poorer nations around the world of their best doctors and nurses. We shouldn't be so proud about that. And we also should look at the fact is there's 300,000 plus vacancies in NHS, but apparently that's how many people we imported to work in the NHS. So where are those people and their families? Something is seriously wrong. I fully agree with you that the NHS needs reform and has needed reform for a long time, but I really do think we're approaching a point where it's no longer just the fault of parliamentarians. It will be the people who run the NHS who will have to answer to the public.
I mean, I actually, for what it's worth, I did interview Dr. Robert Lawrenson. I think outside that same hospital